Welcome to The Voluntarist. Today we're going to be talking about left libertarians. And to some of you, you're going to think, isn't that an oxymoron? Isn't that paradoxical? A left libertarian, someone who believes in very limited or restrictive government, but also has kind of this tendency to kind of sympathize with the socialist agenda and the redistribution of wealth and collectivized property and the end of private ownership. You would be right because that's weird. That's a weird concept. It seems like there are some massive inconsistencies in this ideology, this branch of libertarianism. I don't even think it is a branch of libertarianism. I think they just call themselves that because they're very confused people. And that's my honest opinion. I had a discussion with a very nice and cordial one of these left libertarians on Reddit about how to avoid the consolidation of large corporations in a free society. So that's essentially what I'm going to be using to kind of highlight the differences between left libertarianism and right libertarianism. And of course, as you know, right libertarianism is going to be your anarcho-capitalists, it's going to be your voluntarists, your standard liberty-minded people, like the actual libertarians, the libertarians as libertarianism was intended to be. Those are your right libertarians. And then on the left, you have your socialist libertarians, your communist libertarians, titles that don't make any sense. And we're going to dive into a little bit of that today. So I won't take you through the entire conversation. We talk a little bit about the cost of regulation, which according to a few reports that I found, was about $1.8 trillion on the U.S. economy in 2015, which amounts to about 10.5% of the U.S. GDP. And another study shows that the United States economic growth, has been slowed by 0.8% per year since 1980, owing to the cumulative effects of regulation. I do need to make this point really quickly because it's part of the difference here. For someone who wants a really limited government, which is kind of what libertarianism is, if you're going to call yourself a libertarian, you should want limited government at the very least, preferably no central government, no nation state. But this guy that I'm talking to seems to be kind of fighting for the right of government to exist, because I say that government is necessarily a burden to the economy. It costs people money. It costs opportunities. It costs wealth. And he was kind of confused by that. He was asking me questions. Is it really an inefficiency, just the existence of government? Can't we have a good government? And I say no. Because, what does a government do? And so to explain that, I said a government by its nature, because it imposes regulations simply by existing. Take the regulation of creating de jure monopolies for itself in the defense, justice, and other industries, necessarily creates inefficiencies. This costs wealth, jobs, opportunities, and creates barriers to entry. And the reason it necessarily creates inefficiencies is because regulation forces people to change their behavior. If regulations didn't force people to change their behavior, they would be pointless. You don't need to regulate something where everyone's already doing exactly what you want them to do. So regulations are enacted to use the force of government to coerce people into changing their actions or changing their behaviors to fit the government agenda, so that they can work towards whatever goal that they've set for the economy that year, whatever. Like maybe it's car manufacturing, maybe car sales, maybe they want the revenue of a certain sector of the economy to go up, and people in that sector of the economy have probably paid them off to pass that legislation. Because regulation necessarily changes people's behavior, you have to think of what that does to an ideal exchange. And an ideal exchange, these happen all the time. I don't mean ideal as in, impossible or super rare. I mean, an ideal exchange is just a mutually beneficial exchange between a person that wants what you have more than what they have, and a person, and then you who want what they have more than you want what you have. And that is a mutually beneficial exchange. And then you guys exchange, and you're each happier because you wanted what the other person had more than what you had. And you both traded, and now you have what the other person had. So you're both happier because you value what you now have more than what you used to have. And that's the magic of mutually beneficial exchanges, and they happen all the time. Just one tiny problem. Taxes, regulations, tariffs, all sorts of things that force people to pay extra for things, decrease the value of these exchanges, or force them to participate in a completely different exchange than they would have otherwise engaged in. When two people are making an exchange, and then a third party comes in and uses coercive intervention to alter the terms of the exchange, or make it so risky, i.e. they could go to prison or something like that, that they're forced to break off that exchange and go somewhere else and find something else to do, necessarily they are going to go and take the next best exchange. Because in that moment, what they wanted to do was make that exchange. That was the most valuable thing they could have been doing based on the information they had for themselves, based on their own preferences in that moment. That was the most valuable exchange that they could make. And because of coercive intervention by government regulation, they are now forced to engage in a lesser exchange, an exchange of lesser value to each of them. And the difference between the value that they would have gained from the initial exchange and the value that they are going to gain from this secondary exchange that they were forced to move to, that is the cost. The difference between the values of these two exchanges. That's the cost on the economy imposed by these regulations. The way I'm talking about it, anyways, it may have been different for the calculations that you're going to read about in these articles, which I'll have linked below. When I'm talking about the cost of regulation, I mean the value lost by not being able to engage in the most valuable exchange that you could at that moment. And this happens all the time because people naturally want to exchange with each other, because cooperation is it's human nature. And then exchanges are a symptom of that piece of our human nature, to naturally want to cooperate with one another, to get along, to build something, to save for the future, to prosper. And unfortunately, we live under the jurisdiction of these nation states that think that they're entitled to a percentage of every single freaking exchange that we make. And they think that they're entitled to tell consenting adults that they can or cannot do things that have no victim. Now that I've explained why there is a cost to regulation, and why the mere existence of a nation state, a central government, imposes inefficiencies into an economy which costs jobs, opportunities, and creates barriers to entry, we'll examine his response. To that, he responds, I too want to minimize the inefficiencies that centralized government brings and eliminate the monopoly of force. So I did convince him that there were inefficiencies to centralized government. So he seemed like he was a little hesitant before. I said, no, there are definitely inefficiencies, and necessarily there must be. So then he says, okay, yeah, I want to fix that too, and I want to eliminate the monopoly of force. The complication is this, and this is where we get into the meat of the difference between right and left libertarians. Capitalist business and government are two congruent and independent forms of power that will bolster each other against opposing forces. So the only way to bring one down is to bring both down. And this isn't unreasonable. Government is going to protect the very wealthy who pay them off to pass favorable legislation, and then the very wealthy are going to protect the government because the government is the seat of power that they want to pay for and abuse to shut out competition and protect their investments. So that this isn't irrational of him to think this, and so I don't really have a problem with this point. It's fine. It's a valid concern. It really is. So then to that I reply that I understand the relationship of capitalism and government. Cronyism is a problem because there is a government with power to abuse in the first place. The reason I'm not on the side of this debate that wants to be rid of capitalism is because free trade is inseparable from human nature. People always have and always will engage in the exchange of goods and services, whether property rights are defended by a government, some other entity, or by each person individually. Take the trade of illegal substances and commodities. No government protects those property rights. In fact, they work actively to violate those property rights, but those types of exchanges still occur in abundance. So central government, especially central government, isn't necessary for property rights to exist. Property rights of some kind and the ability to freely give away or retain those rights can never reasonably be expected to go away. This is why bans and socialist policies just bolster black market activity and cause abnormally large misallocations of investments. The free market finds a way to persist, which tends to cause unforeseen consequences for anti-market policies. So the way I see it, we need to just focus on the privatization of government services, virtually eliminating that source of coercive interference. Then we can focus on the new problems and solving those without coercion. And so then he replies that it seems much of the misalignment between us is how we define capitalism and socialism. In other words, I'm defining capitalism as a good thing, and he's defining socialism as a good thing, and we disagree on which one is good. So I'll switch to less loaded terminology. He says, "Do you think it's human nature or distinct human tendency to use money for exchange and charge interest?" And I said, no, just the exchanging part. Money and interest developed naturally within the market over time to facilitate more exchanges and make them easier. And interest developed just because people inherently value money now more than money in the future. $100 now is worth more than having $100 10 years from now. I'm not totally clear on the mechanics of interest, but I do know that interest rate can be viewed kind of as the value of money, if you want to think of it that way. That's how Ron Paul used to explain it, and that's a good enough explanation for me, because it makes sense. And the Fed screws with that all the time, and that's one of the other problems that we could talk for hours about, really. But I'm going just as fast as I can to get through all that I can without making this video too terribly long. But then I go on to say, this is a really interesting question, because I think the exchanging really is just a symptom of people's tendency to cooperate with one another. Exchanges are just the result of that, in my opinion. So really, it was through this conversation that I moved from thinking that, exchanging with one another is human nature, to wanting to cooperate and, build society is a part of human nature. I mean, if having a society living in civilization wasn't part of human nature, we would all be hermits, living by ourselves, killing everyone who walked on our property, we would all try our very best to be self-sufficient and never have developed the division of labor and try to do everything on our own, no cooperation ever. And what would have happened is that our average life expectancy would be like 15 years. Like, we would be born, if we're lucky enough to survive childbirth, we catch a disease, and as we are limping through the woods, where we think our home is, we get eaten by a bear because we're easy targets, because our leg has swollen up to the size of the county fair's blue ribbon watermelon. cooperation is, I'm positive, that is just inherently human. There's something very human about cooperating with one another and living in civilization in a society. So, exchanges are just kind of the result of that. It's us interacting with one another, trying to make each other happy. That's where mutually beneficial exchanges come in. Like someone says, "Hey, I really like the work that you've done. These wooden clocks that you've handcrafted. They're beautiful, and they're so accurate with time. The second hand is so exact. Your craftsmanship." I don't know. I'm just making something up. And then you say, "Yeah, I put a lot of work into this. I would give it to you, but you have to give me something in exchange. And that's bartering. And then to make bartering easier, here comes money. And then money now is worth more than money later. So here comes interest. These things develop over time, but they're all a symptom of wanting to cooperate with one another. And I thought that was one of the more interesting things that I learned from this conversation. And this is why you should talk to people who disagree with you. Because you learn things, and it's awesome. And, whether he knows it or not, he just engaged in a mutually beneficial exchange with me. Because, I hope he learned something, or maybe all he got out of this exchange was, at the end, I asked him to explain a little bit more on his perspective between, ownership and stewardship. And he he wrote like a novel. But he probably enjoyed that. But this was a mutually beneficial exchange because we both chose to engage in a conversation, and I learned something. Hopefully, he learned something. And it was fun. And this is why you should talk to people who disagree with you. It's important. Anyways, then we go on, and he asks, as for property rights, how far do they go? Should they extend to land and other things that cannot really be made? Is it good to exercise property rights on something that one never uses, but that others may have an urgent and superior use for? Is property the fundamental right, or are human rights fundamental? I kind of got lost in his rhetoric here, so I just kind of kept the answer simple. I said property rights extend to the things which labor/action secures or produces. So homesteading or working the land in some meaningful way, where meaningful would be determined by cultural expectations for land ownership. That's up to the society that you live in. Really, what constitutes meaningful in this case, but that would cause that land, if previously unowned by another person, to become your land until you gave it away or somehow or abandoned it or whatever you wanted to do with it, burn it. I don't know. I hope you don't burn it because, you homesteaded it, put a lot of work into the land, you might as well do something with it. But, and then I go on to say, property is, in a way, the fundamental right. And I'll explain why I think that. I've discussed this on the channel before, but fundamentally, we each exclusively own ourselves. This is to say that the most fundamental of all human rights is our right to self-ownership, self-determination, whatever you want to call it. If we can't make choices for ourselves, act in accordance to our own will, and keep the agreed-upon fruits of our labor, that's no way to live at all. That's subhuman. That's a subhuman existence, to be controlled by another. I own my actions as a result of owning myself, and I own the consequences of my actions. So if I work to gather a bunch of previously unowned sticks, those are my sticks because I own myself, my labor, and consequences of that labor, the gathering of the sticks. That's the case for fundamental property rights and original ownership as I understand it. From there, as the owner of these gorgeous sticks, I can choose to forfeit, retain, gift, or exchange my property rights over the sticks. And this is all part of the fundamental human right by the virtue of each person having the exclusive right to their own bodies. To deny private property is to deny people the right to the fruits of their labor, which is to deny them their own self-ownership. If people want to willingly surrender their private property, that's within their property rights to do so as well. Which is something I also pointed out because, in a voluntarist society, if people want to go off and have their communist, they're communes somewhere where everyone shares everything, and everyone exchanges things based on how much work you did, or the labor theory of value, then, by all means, go right ahead. Try it out. If that works for you, then great. But don't force everyone to do it, is the thing. That's voluntarism. And then he says, noted, period. So he just asked because he was asking to find out how close our political values are. And, me and him were both very interested in this conversation without, ever really explicitly stating it to this point. And, how are we different? What's the differences between us? And the answer, he says, is rather close indeed. A tendency to cooperate is what he sees as the driving force of the benefits we have too. Keeping the fruits of one's labor and dispensing of them voluntarily is extremely important as well. I'm not 100% on humans completely owning themselves, which is where, he just totally loses me. Like if keeping the fruits of your labor and dispensing of them voluntarily is extremely important, then why are you not 100% on human beings owning themselves? Though, and then he goes on to say, though my take on individuality and identity isn't totally compatible with a self, in quotation marks, totally separate from the environment, I like to use stewardship instead of ownership. But that's a piece of theory that he hasn't, fleshed out yet. And so, I thought this was interesting. I think there's really a breakdown of, terminology and the definitions that we use. Because he says he's not 100% on self-ownership, and I honestly couldn't tell whether he's, whole hog on the, keeping the fruits of your labor and dispensing of them voluntarily, or if there's an inconsistency here, or maybe he's just, conceptually, he doesn't think that humans can really claim full ownership of themselves. Like they're the product of society, so part of them is kind of owned by society and they owe the society. But even then, to claim some kind of positive right on other people's wealth or property or prosperity or whatever, just by the virtue of them being, in the society, we're crossing a dangerous threshold here. We're in the social contract territory now. That's where we're headed. By virtue of being in the society, you're a part of the society. You're owned in part by society at large. Therefore, we're entitled to a little bit of your money. So here comes the sales tax. Oh, there's a little bit of income tax. Ooh, now a progressive income tax. Now trade tariffs and regulations, and you see how this spirals out of control. Government always spirals out of control. The slippery slope argument does in fact apply to government. It's not a logical fallacy when we're talking about government, as it has proven time and time again. Just look at how many freaking regulations Obama has passed just in this past year alone. It's insane. So after this, I ask him to explain his idea of stewardship versus ownership, because it's kind of important to understanding what he means. I'll just go through and read a little bit of this because, like he said, I don't want to analyze it too much because he himself has not totally fleshed it out. So he left a book down here, and I can read some and then post another paragraph that I'm not reading, so you guys can pause it and read it if you want to. Ownership is a spook, as Stirner once put it. Stewardship is more of a descriptor of how things interact in a positive way. It's emphasis on positive, as in positive right to someone else's stuff. I mean, they're just... I'm getting a sense of some inconsistencies here. Like you can't be for, keeping the fruits of your labor and then say, society at large has a claim to the fruits of your labor. And if so, how much? And how do we determine exactly how much of my labor you're entitled to? It's all kind of ridiculous. But like I said, I don't want to insult this guy. He was extremely nice. one of the nicest socialists I've ever talked. He would probably be pissed that I said that. He claims to be a left libertarian, so calling him a socialist probably wouldn't fly. Quotes, "It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children." And I thought this was an interesting point, we do inherit what our parents leave behind. Then it says it wasn't given to us by our parents. I disagree with that, because our parents had, our prior generations had the things, had the resources and the land and whatever before we did. And when they are dead and gone or gifted to us during their life, it becomes ours because it was given to us or passed down or bequeathed to us by previous generations, previous owners. So I disagree with the first part of this, and then it was loaned to us by our children. And I think this is more like artsy-fartsy poetic crap right here, because I think what it's trying to say is that what we have now will someday be given to our children. And so it will someday be theirs, so it's our responsibility to take care of it. And if that's what it's trying to say, then the first part of the sentence really makes no sense. So I might be interpreting this wrong. I shouldn't have to interpret things, if we're having a conversation about serious literal things, don't use analogies with me. Say what you mean. It's kind of like when Kanye West said George Bush hates black people. Apparently he wasn't being literal. Apparently he was just trying to bring attention to the lack of help offered to the people of New Orleans, who happen to be predominantly black, during Hurricane Katrina. If that's the case, if you didn't actually mean that George Bush hates black people, then maybe you should have said, hey, there's more we could be doing to help the people of New Orleans, rather than get on national television and, publicly slander a man as some form of artsy-fartsy poetic crap trying to bring attention to something without actually bringing attention to it. I mean, you see my issue? It's just kind of frustrating. and humorous at the same time. I just had a conversation about this with someone. We got into kind of an argument, a little tissy, over whether Kanye's comments were justified or not, and I say they're not, because you can't just go on national TV and slander a guy. That's not nice. It's not cool. Word games aside, I generally, I disagree with half of this statement. So your children will get what you have eventually. So you should build it up, make it as nice as possible, build wealth, save for the future, save for your children's future, take care of your land, take care of your estate, so that when you die, your children will get, the best possible start in life. And then their children will be even better off than that, and so on and so on. But this seems like a fairly anti-left sentiment, because the anti-left is always harping on about the estate tax and people just inherit their wealth, they don't earn it, which is a total falsehood. I mean, not a total falsehood. Some people do inherit their wealth, but the vast majority of millionaires in America are new money. They earned it themselves over the course of their lifetime. Not all of it. I mean, I'm sure they inherited something from their parents. That would suck to not inherit anything from your parents. But, this sentence here is just kind of odd to see in defense of this kind of collectivization of property, given that it's indicating that you as an individual have some kind of responsibility to take care of your estate, to pass on to your children, unless it's talking about children in the general sense, as in like literally everyone in society that comes after you. And then it goes to the state to be torn to shreds and passed out like candy to everyone who you don't know and don't care about, rather than your children. In which case, this is totally in line with socialism and the left. But I'm done trying to interpret this. Guys, say what you mean what you say. Don't communicate in artsy-fartsy poetic crap. And I've said that 3 times now because it's really annoying in these kinds of conversations. So stewardship says that something is connected to you. You decide how it is used, but you have obligations as well. So I guess what he's saying here is that, my family, I don't control my family, but I have obligations to my family, which is true. It is true. I have obligations to take care of my family, and to, like, if my dad asked me to come over and mow the lawn, I'm gonna come over and mow the lawn. If they need help taking down Christmas, I'm gonna come over and help take down Christmas. Not because I have to, not because their will is dominant to mine, not because they control me, but because I love them and I want to, which I think is something that is missing from his explanation. And, my town, I grew up here, I care about it. So if someone from my town needed help doing something, I would help them. But I've helped total strangers in towns that I really don't care about. Like I went and worked in this, like, podunk town, like dirt poor. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how low income this town was, how devoid they were of opportunity. They were just, like, in the middle of nowhere. Really all they had going for them was each other and the place where I worked, which was kind of a big deal. It was like the highest paying jobs in the area, which is why I was there in the first place. And this guy came up to me at a gas station. He was covered in scars, like, just like head to toe, just scarred up, big scars. Like, oh my God, did you get in a fight with a bear kind of scars? And then he had golden teeth implants and, like, massive tattoos on these, just ripped. He was a massive dude, just ripped, super muscular. And he was wearing, like, a do-rag or something. And he comes up to me and says, "Hey man, my truck broke down, man. I need a ride back to my house. Can you help me out?" And I was like, "Sure, dude. Give me a second. I gotta finish putting gas in my tank. I'll give you a ride." He was like, "Really, dude?" And then, like, the whole way back to his house, he was like, "Dude, you're too nice, man. You can't do this no more. You, like, don't give people rides no more. You're too nice. You're gonna get robbed or killed or something." I was like, "Yeah, dude. Yeah, I know. Just please don't kill me, because you could strangle me with your pinky finger." he was huge. But yeah, so, like I don't mind helping people, and it's not really a part of this, like, collectivization mindset. It's just like, I'm a nice person. I voluntarily want to help people. But, like, I prioritize my family and my town over others, just because of that relational status that, he kind of mentioned. So I'm gonna I'm gonna stop harping on this, because like he said, he hasn't really thought this all out, and I haven't really taken the time to really dig into what he means by stewardship. I've learned a little just even in the course of making this video, and I hope that you've noted this kind of not a journey, that's a little bit dramatic, but these kind of steps that I've taken to try and understand his point, and where my thoughts on what he was saying may have changed, like mid-sentence, because you take another look at something and then you think, oh, you know what, I can see where he's coming from. And, a little bit of understanding goes a long way when you're talking to someone who you disagree with, and I do really disagree with this guy. But there's always a learning experience waiting around the corner when you just try to understand what they're saying just a little bit. So, I mean, this was a fun video to make. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So I think we've really taken a good hard look at left libertarianism and kind of the basic differences between, voluntarism, anarcho-capitalism, and your standard libertarians, as opposed to these people who call themselves left libertarians. And I'm not totally convinced that they're even libertarian at all, even after this. But I don't know. You let me know what you think. Tell me what you think left libertarianism means. Tell me if this guy even really accurately represents left libertarianism in your opinion. And I look forward to reading your comments, if there are any. I know not too many people watch my videos, but if you feel like commenting, that would be great, and I'll read it. And thank you for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world to me. And I'll see you in the next one.